Hey, I'm Dr. Carter, and today I want to talk about the most consequential shift in nutrition science of the last decade, one that changes how you should think about the food you eat every day in a way that goes far deeper than calories, macros, or any diet you have ever followed. In 2025, this field reached what researchers called a turning point. The 2025 to 2030 dietary guidelines, published this year, explicitly advise Americans to avoid highly processed, packaged, and pre-prepared foods. That is a first. For the first time in the history of American dietary guidelines, a category of food has been named and warned against, not based on its caloric content or its macronutrient profile, but based on what it is and how it was made. That's what this channel is for. The science behind the shift, the answers your doctor doesn't always have time to explain. Subscribe now and turn on the bell. New videos every week. Here is what most people believe about ultra-processed foods. They are bad because they are high in calories, high in sugar, high in saturated fat, high in sodium. The problem is the nutritional content, and if you could find a version with better numbers on the label, the problem would be solved. That belief is wrong, and the 2025 research proves it in a way that changes everything. A 2025 randomized controlled trial showed the harmful effects of ultra-processed foods on weight gain and metabolic and reproductive health, regardless of excessive caloric intake. The same calories, the same macros, but one diet built on ultra-processed foods and one built on minimally processed whole foods, and the outcomes were measurably significantly different. This means the danger of ultra-processed foods is not primarily in the nutrition label. It is in what they do to your body that the nutrition label does not and cannot capture. In the past year alone, ultra-processed foods have been linked to arthritis, precancerous colon polyps, prediabetes in young adults, reduced fertility, cognitive decline, and a higher risk for developing multiple sclerosis. And yet 74% of US adults believe ultra-processed foods are bad for their health. But most have trouble identifying them. Today I am going to show you exactly what ultra-processed foods are, the definition most people have never heard, the 8 specific mechanisms by which they damage the body independently of their caloric content, and the exact framework for identifying and replacing them in your daily life after 50. And mechanism number 5 is the one that stops people cold, because it connects ultra-processed food consumption to something most adults over 50 are experiencing daily and attributing entirely to aging. Stay until the end, because the final section gives you the practical framework that makes this actionable without overhauling your entire life. Let's get into it. Before we get to the mechanisms, I need to establish the definition, because most people's understanding of what makes a food ultra-processed is either wrong or incomplete. The most widely used scientific framework for classifying food by degree of processing is the NOVA classification system, developed by researchers at the University of São Paulo and now used in research across more than 30 countries. Group 1 is unprocessed or minimally processed foods: fresh meat, fish, vegetables, fruits, eggs, milk, legumes, nuts. Foods that are essentially in or close to their natural state. Group 2 is processed culinary ingredients: olive oil, butter, flour, sugar, salt. Things extracted from natural foods and used in cooking. Group 3 is processed foods: canned vegetables, cheese, cured meats, freshly baked bread. Foods that use Group 2 ingredients to preserve or modify Group 1 foods, still recognizable as food. Group 4 is ultra-processed foods, and this is the category the research is about. Ultra-processed foods are industrial formulations made mostly or entirely from substances extracted from foods or derived from food constituents, combined with additives not found in home kitchens, emulsifiers, stabilizers, artificial flavors, colors, sweeteners, thickeners, and processing aids. The key distinction is not just what went into them, it is what was done to the food matrix. In whole food, the physical structure of the food, the cell walls, the fiber architecture, the protein folding, the fat encapsulation, slows digestion, regulates absorption, signals satiety, and interacts with the gut microbiome in ways that have co-evolved with human biology over hundreds of thousands of years. Ultra-processing destroys this matrix. High energy density and disrupted food matrices resulting from industrial processing promote faster eating rates. Hyperpalatable formulations rich in sugar, salt, and fat encourage excess energy intake. Certain food additives, including emulsifiers, may adversely affect gut health, and the latest research goes further. Two widely consumed food additive emulsifiers caused transgenerational microbiota alteration that led to increased long-term susceptibility to metabolic and inflammatory diseases. The damage to the gut microbiome from food emulsifiers was passed to the next generation. Here are the 8 mechanisms. Mechanism number 1. Gut microbiome destruction, the upstream damage that drives everything else. The gut microbiome is the foundation of metabolic, immune, and neurological health, and ultra-processed foods are one of the most potent disruptors of microbiome diversity and function identified in the research. The mechanisms are multiple. Ultra-processed foods are almost entirely devoid of the dietary fiber that gut bacteria require to survive and produce short-chain fatty acids. They contain emulsifiers, specifically carboxymethylcellulose and polysorbate 80, found in most processed foods, that directly damage the mucus layer lining the gut wall, disrupting the barrier between gut bacteria and the bloodstream. And they contain artificial sweeteners, particularly sucralose and saccharin, that alter gut bacterial composition even at the doses found in a single serving. The result is a gut microbiome that is less diverse, less functional, and less able to produce the short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, propionate, acetate, that regulate inflammation, support the intestinal barrier, trigger GLP-1 hormone secretion, and protect against metabolic and neurological disease. For adults over 50, where gut microbiome diversity is already declining with age, ultra-processed food consumption accelerates this decline and removes the biological foundation that most other health interventions depend on. Mechanism number 2. Chronic systemic inflammation. Through multiple simultaneous pathways, ultra-processed foods drive chronic systemic inflammation through 3 distinct pathways, and all 3 operate independently of caloric intake. First, the emulsifier pathway. Food emulsifiers disrupt the gut epithelial barrier, allowing bacterial products including lipopolysaccharides to cross into systemic circulation. Lipopolysaccharides are among the most potent activators of the inflammatory cascade in the human body. A permeable gut from chronic emulsifier exposure is a chronic source of systemic inflammatory activation. Second, the advanced glycation end product pathway. Ultra-processed foods are typically cooked at high temperatures, frying, baking, extruding, that generate advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. AGEs directly activate inflammatory receptors on immune cells and endothelial tissue. For adults over 50 who already have elevated AGE accumulation from decades of metabolic activity, ultra-processed food AGEs compound an already elevated inflammatory burden, Third, the omega-6 to omega-3 imbalance. Ultra-processed foods are almost universally produced with refined seed oils, corn oil, soybean oil, canola oil, that are extremely high in omega-6 fatty acids. The optimal omega-6 to omega-3 ratio for human health is approximately 4:1. The average American consuming a typical ultra-processed food diet has a ratio of 20:1 or higher. Chronic omega-6 excess directly drives arachidonic acid-mediated inflammation throughout every tissue in the body. Mechanism number 3, insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction beyond sugar content. Ultra-processed foods drive insulin resistance through mechanisms that go far beyond their sugar content, which is why reducing the sugar on the nutrition label does not resolve the metabolic problem. The destroyed food matrix is the primary driver. In whole food, the fiber architecture slows glucose absorption, producing a gradual, manageable blood glucose response. When the food matrix is destroyed in ultra-processing, glucose is absorbed almost immediately, producing rapid blood glucose spikes followed by compensatory insulin surges. This pattern, repeated multiple times daily across years and decades, is the primary mechanism of insulin resistance development. The emulsifier-induced gut permeability compounds this. Lipopolysaccharides crossing a damaged gut barrier directly impair insulin signaling in liver and muscle tissue, producing insulin resistance independently of glucose intake, and the appetite dysregulation compounds it further. Ultra-processed foods bypass the normal satiety signaling pathways, producing overconsumption that drives caloric surplus independent of the individual's intention to eat less. For adults over 50, where insulin sensitivity is already naturally declining, the insulin resistance burden of a high ultra-processed food diet is particularly dangerous and particularly difficult to reverse through exercise and dietary modification alone, while the underlying ultra-processed food exposure continues. Mechanism number 4, cardiovascular damage through inflammation, lipids, and endothelial injury. High ultra-processed food exposure is associated with increased risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and all-cause mortality. The cardiovascular mechanisms are now well characterized. Chronic systemic inflammation from gut permeability and omega-6 excess drives endothelial dysfunction, the same mechanism we discussed in our cholesterol video, as the primary trigger of atherosclerotic plaque formation. Elevated triglycerides from rapid glucose absorption and excess fructose from high fructose corn syrup directly raise cardiovascular risk independent of LDL levels, and the sodium content of most ultra-processed foods, which dramatically exceeds what is found in home-cooked equivalents, drives hypertension through mechanisms that are well established and clinically significant. Researchers tracking over 63,000 adults found that high-quality, minimally processed plant foods significantly reduce cardiovascular risk. But when those plant foods are ultra-processed, the cardiovascular benefit disappears. The same food, the same plant source, ultra-processed, and the cardiovascular protection is gone. This is the clearest possible demonstration that the harm is in the processing, not the ingredient. Mechanism number 5, cognitive decline and brain damage, the mechanism that surprises people most. Findings include potential impairments in executive cognitive function among older adults from ultra-processed food consumption. Ultra-processed foods have been linked to cognitive decline and stroke. The mechanisms connecting ultra-processed food consumption to brain damage are multiple, and most adults over 50 have never heard any of them. First, the neuroinflammation pathway. The systemic inflammation produced by ultra-processed food consumption crosses the blood-brain barrier and produces neuroinflammation, the chronic low-grade brain inflammation now recognized as a primary driver of cognitive decline, depression, and dementia progression. Second, the gut-brain axis pathway. The destruction of gut microbiome diversity from ultra-processed food consumption disrupts the gut-brain axis, reducing the production of neurotrophic factors including B, D, and F, impairing serotonin synthesis, 90% of which occurs in the gut, and compromising the vagal signaling that connects gut health to neurological function. Third, the vascular pathway. The cardiovascular damage described in mechanism number 4, endothelial dysfunction, elevated triglycerides, hypertension, directly reduces cerebral blood flow and accelerates the vascular cognitive impairment that contributes to dementia progression. For adults over 50 who experience brain fog, word-finding difficulty, or mood changes, and who consume ultra-processed foods regularly, this mechanism is one of the most clinically relevant explanations available, and one of the most actionable because it is entirely modifiable through dietary change. 2 more mechanisms to go, and both connect to the most fundamental questions of how long you will live and how well you will feel. Mechanism number 6, cancer risk through multiple biological pathways. Ultra-processed foods have been linked to precancerous colon polyps and multiple cancer-associated conditions. The 2025 Dietary Guidelines Umbrella Review identified moderate to high certainty evidence for the association between ultra-processed food consumption and cancer risk, representing the first time this association has reached the level of evidence required for official dietary guidance inclusion. The mechanisms are multiple. The gut microbiome disruption from emulsifiers and lack of fiber reduces the production of butyrate, the short-chain fatty acid that is one of the primary defenses against colorectal cancer through its role in maintaining colonocyte health and regulating apoptosis in damaged cells. The chronic inflammation from multiple pathways creates the pro-tumor microenvironment that facilitates cancer initiation and progression, and specific additives, including nitrates in processed meats and certain artificial coloring agents, have direct carcinogenic activity at the doses consumed in typical ultra-processed food diets. Mechanism number 7, mental health, depression, anxiety, and mood dysregulation. The connection between ultra-processed food consumption and mental health is one of the most rapidly developing areas in nutritional psychiatry, and one of the least discussed in conventional medical practice. The mechanism operates primarily through 3 pathways: the gut-brain axis disruption, reducing serotonin precursor availability and neurotrophic factor production; the neuroinflammatory pathway, in which chronic systemic inflammation produces the neurochemical environment associated with depression and anxiety; and the blood glucose volatility pathway, in which the rapid blood glucose spikes and crashes produced by ultra-processed food consumption directly produce mood instability, irritability, anxiety, and fatigue through cortisol and adrenaline responses to glycemic dysregulation. For adults over 50 experiencing mood changes, anxiety, or emotional flatness, and who consume ultra-processed foods regularly, the dietary contribution to neurochemical disruption deserves clinical investigation alongside the hormonal and psychological factors most physicians evaluate first. Mechanism number 8, accelerated biological aging at the cellular level. The most recent and most striking finding in ultra-processed food research connects consumption directly to biological aging, not as a consequence of disease, but as a molecular mechanism measurable through epigenetic aging clocks. Multiple 2025 studies using DNA methylation biomarkers, the same epigenetic aging measures we discussed in our SONA video, have found that high ultra-processed food consumption is associated with significantly accelerated biological aging compared to minimally processed food consumption at equivalent caloric intake. The mechanism converges on all the pathways described above: chronic inflammation, gut microbiome disruption, insulin resistance, oxidative stress from advanced glycation end products, and mitochondrial dysfunction from chronic omega-6 excess. Together, these mechanisms drive the epigenetic aging acceleration that is now measurable in populations with high ultra-processed food intake. For adults over 50 who are interested in longevity, the biological aging acceleration from ultra-processed food consumption represents one of the most modifiable and most impactful targets available. If you recognize the mechanisms your diet may be activating, what comes next is exactly how to identify and address them. Now for the part that matters most: how to actually identify ultra-processed foods and what to replace them with in a realistic, sustainable way. First, learn to identify ultra-processed foods by ingredients, not nutrition labels. The nutrition label will not tell you whether a food is ultra-processed. A food can have excellent macros, low calories, and high protein, and still be ultra-processed. The ingredient list is what tells you the signals that a food is ultra-processed: ingredients you would not find in a home kitchen, emulsifiers, carboxymethylcellulose, polysorbate 80, carrageenan, lecithin when used as a stabilizer, artificial flavors and colors, listed as artificial flavor, red 40, yellow 5, blue 1, sweeteners, ash sulfame potassium, sucralose, aspartame, hydrolyzed proteins, modified starches, preservatives beyond basic salt, TBHQ, BHA, BHT, thickeners and gelling agents, xanthan gum, guar gum, when used in isolation. If the ingredient list contains substances from this category, the food is ultra-processed regardless of what the macros say. Second, the NOVA practical categories for daily decision-making. Ultra-processed categories that most adults over 50 consume daily without recognizing them. Packaged breakfast cereals including most granolas, flavored yogurts, packaged bread with more than 5 ingredients, most protein bars and meal replacement shakes, diet sodas and flavored sparkling waters with artificial sweeteners, packaged soups and sauces with emulsifiers, most fast food regardless of the protein or vegetable content, and virtually all packaged snack foods regardless of health marketing. The minimally processed alternatives that require the least behavioral change: plain whole oats instead of packaged cereals, plain Greek yogurt with whole fruit instead of flavored yogurt, sourdough or bread with fewer than 5 ingredients, whole food protein sources, eggs, fish, meat instead of protein bars, sparkling water without additives instead of diet sodas. Third, the 80-20 approach for sustainability. The harm is cumulative, driven by the proportion of ultra-processed foods in the overall diet over months and years. Adults who reduce ultra-processed food consumption from 60 to 70% of their diet, which is average for American adults, to 20 to 30% produce measurable improvements in inflammatory markers, gut microbiome diversity, and metabolic health within 8 to 12 weeks. This does not require perfection. It requires proportion. Fourth, prioritize the highest impact replacements first. The highest priority replacements for adults over 50, removing emulsifier-containing foods from daily use because of gut permeability impact, replacing refined seed oils with olive oil and animal fats because of the omega-6 balance, eliminating artificial sweeteners because of microbiome disruption, and replacing packaged breakfast products with whole food alternatives, because breakfast is the highest ultra-processed food exposure meal for most adults. Important note: if you have established chronic disease, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, bring this framework to your physician or registered dietitian as a structured approach to dietary modification. Do not use it to replace medical nutrition therapy. Today you heard what the 2025 research has been converging on and what the official dietary guidance has now, for the first time in history, explicitly stated. Ultra-processed foods are not dangerous because of their calories. They are dangerous because of what industrial processing does to food. The destroyed matrix, the emulsifiers that damage your gut, the food additives that alter your microbiome, the refined oils that drive chronic inflammation, the AGEs that accelerate aging, and the hyperpalatable formulations that bypass every biological system your body uses to regulate intake, satisfaction, and health. You saw the 8 mechanisms, from the gut microbiome destruction that undermines every other health intervention you are making, to the neuroinflammation and gut-brain axis disruption that connects what you eat to how you think and feel, to the accelerated biological aging measurable through epigenetic clocks in populations with high ultra-processed food intake. And you saw the framework identifying ultra-processed foods by their ingredient lists rather than their nutrition labels, the NOVA categories that make daily decisions faster, the 80-20 approach that makes this sustainable, and the 4 highest impact replacements that produce measurable results within weeks. Here is what I want to leave you with. The nutrition label has been the lens through which Americans have been taught to evaluate food for 50 years. Calories, fat, sodium, protein. That lens misses the most important thing: whether what you are eating is still structurally recognizable as food to the biological systems that have to process it. Count the ingredients, not the calories. If this video changed how you think about the food you are eating, please hit the like button. It helps this channel grow and reach more people who deserve to know what the research actually shows. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Share this with someone over 50 who is reading nutrition labels carefully and still not understanding why their health is not improving. This framework might be the missing piece, and leave a comment right now. Tell me, when you look at your daily diet through the NOVA lens, what percentage do you think is ultra-processed? And did you know about the mechanisms beyond calories before watching this video? I read every comment personally. I'm Dr. Carter, I'm here, and I'll see you in the next video.